There was a time in this country when a child in foster care was somebody the whole community looked out for. When neighbors knew the names of every kid being shuffled between homes. When teachers and pastors and shopkeepers all kept an eye on the children whose parents could not. And when two little brothers got separated by a system that did its best but could not always keep families together, the community would do everything in their power to keep those boys connected. That used to be the kind of country we were. A country where children mattered, where brothers were not allowed to lose each other, where every kid had at least somebody. But somewhere along the way, the system got bigger, the paperwork got thicker, records got sealed, files got lost, and some little boys who had been split up at 4 and 6 years old grew up never knowing they had a brother out there, living on the other side of the country, eating breakfast at a different kitchen table, going to a different school, carrying their own mysterious sense that somebody, was missing from their lives. But what happened on that Thursday afternoon on the Family Feud stage would remind every single person in that room, and millions of viewers watching at home, that the bond between brothers cannot be erased by paperwork. That two little boys who held each other on the night they were separated will, somehow, find their way back to each other, even if it takes 50 years. Even if it takes a private investigator. Even if it takes a daughter who refuses to give up. Even if it takes a stage in Los Angeles with millions of people watching. Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of Family Feud episodes. He had seen every kind of family reunion. Long-lost parents and children, estranged spouses, distant cousins meeting for the first time. He thought he had seen them all. But on this Thursday, Steve was about to witness something specific, something different. Two grown men, both in their late 50s, both raised by different families in different states, both carrying the same exact birthmark on their right shoulder, both bearing the same shape of jaw and the same color of eyes, both having spent their entire lives feeling like they had been split in half, were about to meet for the first time since they had been little boys clinging to each other in a social worker's office in Mississippi, and when the moment finally happened. When the second brother walked through the doors at the back of the studio, Steve Harvey was going to do something he had spent years training himself not to do on camera. He was going to give up. He was going to stop being the host. He was going to step back, and he was going to cry, right alongside 200 audience members who would also be crying, because this story, this particular reunion, was bigger than any of them, bigger than the show, bigger than television itself. Before we get into this beautiful story that will absolutely move you, please do me one quick favor right now. Hit that like button below. Smash that subscribe bell too. Because stories like this one are exactly why we are here. Trust me, you are going to want to stay until the very end. This is not a story you will forget. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not ever. To understand why these two brothers were about to meet for the first time on national television, you first need to understand the man who was standing on that stage. His name was Curtis Walker. He was 58 years old, a retired postal worker from a small town in Georgia, a devoted husband, the father of 3 grown children, and a man who had spent his entire life with a quiet, persistent feeling that he was missing something, or somebody. Curtis had been adopted as a young boy. He had always known he was adopted. His adoptive parents, Earl and Mee Walker, had been honest with him from the very beginning. They had been good people, hardworking black folks who had not been able to have children of their own. Earl had worked at a tire factory. Mee had been a school cook. They had taken Curtis in when he was 4 years old. They had loved him fiercely. They had given him everything they had to give. They had raised him in a small house in rural Georgia. They had taught him to be a good man. They had been the only parents Curtis had ever really known. But Curtis had carried something with him from his early childhood, something he had not been able to explain. He had memories from before he had come to live with the Walkers. Vague memories, fragments, the smell of red beans and rice cooking, a blue blanket with a tear in the corner, the sound of a woman singing church hymns while doing dishes, and the clearest memory of all, a small hand holding his hand tightly while they sat on a hard wooden bench in some kind of office. The little hand had belonged to another small boy, a boy with the same color skin as his, a boy who had been crying, a boy who had been holding Curtis the way somebody holds a person they love and do not want to let go of. Curtis had asked his adoptive parents about that memory many times when he had been growing up. Earl and Mee had been honest with him. They had told him what they knew. Curtis had a brother, a younger brother. The two boys had been put into the foster care system together when their mother had died from an overdose. Their father had not been around. The state of Mississippi had tried to find a family that could take both boys. They had not been able to find one. The brothers had been separated. Curtis, who had been 4 years old, had been adopted by Earl and Mee. His younger brother, who had been just 2 years old at the time, had been adopted by another family, a family the Walkers had not known. The records had been sealed. There had been no contact information. The two little boys had simply been split up, like cattle. Curtis had grown up wondering about his brother, always. He would sit on the front porch of his parents' house in the evenings and look up at the stars. He would wonder if his brother was looking up at the same stars. He would wonder what his brother looked like, what his brother sounded like, whether his brother had been adopted by good people, whether his brother was happy. When Curtis had become a young man, he had tried to find his brother. He had been 20 years old when he had first started looking. He had hired a small-town private investigator. Nothing had come of it. He had written letters to the state of Mississippi. He had been told the records were sealed. He had been told there was nothing they could do. He had registered on every reunion website that had existed in the early days of the internet. He had submitted DNA tests. He had done everything he could think of. For 38 years, nothing had ever come back. The trail had been cold from the start. The state had done a thorough job of erasing the connection between the two boys. Curtis had eventually made peace with the idea that he might never know what had happened to his brother. But the feeling of missing somebody, that had never gone away. Even now, at 58 years old, Curtis would still get the feeling sometimes. He would be standing in line at the grocery store. Or he would be sitting in church, and he would feel it, like there was a phantom limb, a part of himself that had been amputated when he was 4 years old. He had told his wife Doreen about it many times over the years. She had always understood. She had always been patient with it. She had been the only person in the world who had really known about Curtis's quiet ache. Curtis's 3 grown children, Marcus, Tasha, and Devin, had grown up hearing the story of their lost uncle. They had asked their father about him constantly when they were little. They had grown up imagining what their uncle might be like. As they had grown into adults, they had become determined to find him. Marcus, the oldest, had been particularly committed. He was a software engineer at a big tech company. He had been quietly working on the search for his uncle for almost 3 years. He had been using his tech skills to dig into databases. He had been using his money to hire investigators. He had been doing things in secret because he had not wanted to get his father's hopes up if it did not work out. Marcus had finally caught a break 6 months ago. A new DNA database had merged with several others. A match had come back. A close family member match. The match had been to a man named Henry Banks in Tennessee. Marcus had reached out to Henry Banks's daughter, who was named Jasmine. Jasmine had been astonished. She had told Marcus that her father had been adopted as a baby from Mississippi, that her father had spent his whole life wondering about an older brother he could not quite remember, that her father, like Curtis, had also been carrying around the strange feeling of missing somebody he could not name. Marcus and Jasmine had spent the next 6 months coordinating. They had done DNA tests to confirm the match. They had compared adoption records. They had pieced together the story. Their fathers were definitely brothers. They had been separated in Mississippi in 1969. Curtis had been 4. Henry had been 2. They had been kept apart by sealed records and a system that had not been built for them. When Marcus had heard that his cousin Tasha had been planning to apply to Family Feud as a family team, he had reached out to Jasmine. The two of them had decided this would be the moment. They would surprise both of their fathers at the same time. Curtis would not know. Henry would not know either. Both families would walk onto the show. 2 brothers who had not seen each other in 54 years would be in the same building for the first time in their adult lives, and they would not know it until Steve Harvey told them. The Walker family came onto the stage with a warm, steady energy. Curtis was in the middle, a solid man, wearing a clean button-down shirt and pressed pants. His hair was mostly gray. He had kind eyes. The kind of eyes that had clearly seen a lot of life and remained kind anyway. His wife Doreen was on his left, a beautiful woman in her late 50s with silver braids. His son Marcus was on his right, the software engineer who had spent 3 years secretly searching. His daughter Tasha was next to her brother. His youngest son Devin rounded out the team. Steve came over to greet them. He shook hands with everyone. When he got to Curtis, he held his hand a little longer. "Mr. Curtis," Steve said, "tell me about yourself, sir." "I am retired now, Mr. Harvey," Curtis said. His voice was deep, warm. 35 years at the post office." 35 years, Steve said. "A man who showed up every single day." Curtis nodded. "I tried to." Steve looked at the family. "And these are your kids and your wife?" "Yes, sir, this is Doreen. She has put up with me for 36 years. And these are my 3 kids, Marcus, Tasha, and Devin." Steve smiled. "Y'all got a beautiful family, Mr. Curtis." Curtis looked at his family. He nodded slowly. I have been blessed." What none of the audience knew, what Curtis himself did not know, was that another family had walked into the studio that morning. They were sitting in the audience right now. They had been there for the entire pre-show. They had watched the Walker family come out onto the stage. They had been crying quietly in their seats for the last half hour. They were waiting, hoping, praying that the moment would happen the way it had been planned. The other family was the Banks family. Curtis's brother Henry was sitting in the third row. Henry was 56 years old, 2 years younger than Curtis. He had been raised by his adoptive parents in Tennessee. He had grown up to become a high school football coach. He had also been carrying the lifelong feeling of having lost a brother. He had done his own searches over the years. He had submitted his own DNA tests. And 6 months ago, he had received the phone call from Marcus Walker. Marcus, his nephew, telling him he had a brother named Curtis, telling him that they had matched, telling him that this was real. Henry had been completely floored. He had cried for 2 days. He had told his wife Vivian. He had told his daughter Jasmine. The whole Banks family had been in on the secret for the last 6 months. They had been waiting for this moment, hoping it would go right. The game started. Walker family was playing against the Bradford family from Texas. The Bradfords were a fun, loud family. The Walkers were quieter, but they were sharp. Marcus was a strong player. Tasha was funny. Devin was charming. Doreen was steady. Curtis contributed when he could. He was a thoughtful man. He took his time. The game was tied after the first round. It was during the second round that something began to happen. Steve asked a question. Name something you might have always wondered about your past. The Bradfords buzzed in first. They got who my biological parents were for 38 points. They got what my real heritage is for 24. Curtis was the last to buzz in. He paused for a long moment, then he said very quietly, my brother. The board turned around. Lost Siblings was on there, number 5, 7 points. The audience clapped politely, but Steve had heard the way Curtis had said it. Steve walked over to him. Mr. Curtis, Steve said, brother. That was a specific answer. Tell me about it. Curtis nodded slowly. He had not been planning to talk about this, but it was already out there. He took a breath. Mr. Harvey, he said, I was adopted as a 4-year-old. I had a younger brother. He was 2. We were taken away from our biological mother when she passed away. The state could not find a family for both of us. I went to the family that raised me. My brother went to a different family. We were separated in 1969. I have spent my whole life wondering about him. I have never been able to find him. I have looked for almost 40 years. He has just been gone. The audience had gone quiet. Several people in the audience had started crying already. The Banks family in the third row was holding their hands over their mouths. They were trying not to lose it before the moment came. Steve's eyes had gone soft. He nodded slowly. Mr. Curtis, I am so sorry, sir. Curtis nodded. It is okay. I have made my peace with it. I just hope he had a good life, that he was loved, that he is happy somewhere. Steve was quiet for a moment, then his son Marcus stepped forward. He had been waiting for this moment for 3 years. He could not wait anymore. Mr. Harvey, Marcus said, can I say something? Steve nodded. Of course, son. Marcus turned to his father. He was already crying. Dad. I have to tell you something I have been planning for a long time. I need you to listen to me. Curtis looked at his son, confused. Marcus, son, what is going on? Marcus took a breath. Dad, 3 years ago I started looking for your brother. I did not tell you because I did not want to disappoint you if I could not find him. I have been working on it, quietly, with Tasha and Devin. We hired investigators. We submitted your DNA to every database we could find. We have been searching for 3 years. Curtis's face had gone still. He was staring at his son. Marcus, Curtis whispered. Son, what did you find? Marcus's voice was shaking. Dad, 6 months ago, we finally got a hit, a DNA match, a close family member, a brother. Your brother is alive, Dad. His name is Henry Banks. He lives in Tennessee. He has been looking for you, too. He has been looking his whole life. Curtis collapsed against the podium. His wife Doreen caught him on one side. Tasha caught him on the other. He was shaking. He could not stand up straight. He could not speak. Henry, he finally whispered. My brother is named Henry, Marcus was crying. Yes, Dad, his name is Henry, like our grandfather, your biological father, Henry Walker. The mother named Henry after his father. She had named you Curtis after her own father. The 2 boys had family names. The adoptive families never knew that. Curtis was sobbing now. The audience was completely silent. The Banks family in the third row was in tears. Steve stepped forward. He took Curtis's hand. Mr. Curtis, sir, listen to me. Your brother is here. Henry is here today, right now. He is sitting in the audience. He has been waiting all morning. Will you let him come up here, sir? Curtis was shaking his head. He was crying too hard to speak. He could not believe it. He just kept shaking his head. Doreen put her arm around her husband. Curtis, honey. He is here, Marcus told me a year ago. I have been keeping the secret for you. I knew you would not believe it. Henry is here, right here. He has wanted to meet you for 54 years, just like you have wanted to meet him. Let him come up, baby. Let your brother come up. Curtis finally nodded. He could not speak, but he nodded. Steve turned to the audience. He looked at the third row. He gestured gently. Mr. Henry, sir, would you and your family come up here, please? There was a stir in the audience. 200 people turned to look. The Banks family stood up. Henry was a tall man, the same height as Curtis, same color skin, same color eyes, same shape of jaw. He was wearing a button-down shirt and dark pants. He was crying. He had been crying for the last hour. His wife Vivian was holding his hand. His daughter Jasmine was on his other side. Their family started walking down the aisle, slowly, carefully. Curtis watched them coming. His hand was over his mouth. He was watching the man at the front of the line. His brother, the brother he had not seen in 54 years, the brother whose face he could only barely remember from being 4 years old. Henry reached the front of the audience. He climbed up onto the stage. He stopped about 10 feet away from Curtis. He looked at his brother, really looked at him. He saw what Curtis was seeing. They were mirror images of each other, two old black men in their late 50s, the same eyes, the same face, the same blood. Henry's voice came out cracked, broken, full of 54 years of waiting. "Curtis," Henry whispered. "My brother, oh my God, Curtis, I have been looking for you my whole life." Curtis took one shaky step forward. "Henry," he whispered. "Little Henry, you are here, you are really here." And then they ran toward each other, both of them, two old men, running. They crashed into each other in the middle of the stage. They wrapped their arms around each other, and they both started weeping. The kind of weeping that two grown men do when something that has been broken inside them their whole lives finally gets put back together. For a long time, the only sound in the studio was the sound of two grown men sobbing into each other's shoulders. Curtis was holding Henry. Henry was holding Curtis. Both of them were shaking. Both of them were saying things into each other's ears that the microphones could not pick up, things that were just for them. The audience was completely silent. 200 people were watching, crying. Some of them were standing. Some of them had their hands over their mouths. The Bradford family on the other podium was holding each other and crying. Steve Harvey was off to the side, both hands over his face. He was sobbing too. He was not even trying to hide it. After a long time, Henry pulled back from the hug just enough to look at his brother. He was holding Curtis's face in his hands. "You are real," Henry whispered. "I cannot believe it." "You are real, Curtis. You are real." "You are real too, brother," Curtis whispered back. "You are real too." Henry was looking at every line of Curtis's face, studying him, memorizing him, the way you memorize somebody you have been searching for your whole life. "Curtis," Henry said, "I want you to know something. I remembered you. I always remembered you. I have these tiny little flashes of memory. From when I was 2, there was an older boy. He used to give me his food when there was not enough. He used to hold my hand at night. I remembered him. I did not know his name. I did not know he was my brother until 6 months ago." Curtis was nodding. "I remembered you too, brother. I remembered the night they took us. I remembered your hand. I remembered you crying. I have been carrying that memory for 54 years. Henry pulled Curtis back into another hug. They stood there for another long moment, just holding each other. When Henry finally pulled back again, he had something in his hand. A small object. He held it out to Curtis. It was a tiny piece of fabric, faded, pale blue, frayed at the edges, almost falling apart from age. Curtis looked at it. His face changed. He gasped. "Henry," Curtis whispered, "is that?" "It is the corner of the blanket," Henry said. "The blue blanket with the tear in the corner. Mama had given it to us when we were babies. We used to share it. The night they separated us, the blanket was with me. The lady at the office tore the corner off and gave it to you, so you would have a piece of it. Do you remember?" Curtis was nodding. He was crying again. He took the small piece of frayed blue fabric. I remember, Henry. I have always remembered. I had a corner of a blue blanket. I lost it when I was about 10. I have been so sad about losing it. I have kept the rest of the blanket all these years," Henry said. "I have kept it in a box. Now we have both pieces. Now we are both whole again." Curtis hugged his brother again. The audience was destroyed. Steve Harvey had given up trying to host. He was just standing there crying. Henry's daughter, Jasmine, stepped up onto the stage. She had a bag in her hand. She walked over to her father. She handed him the bag. He took it. He turned back to Curtis. "Curtis," Henry said, "my daughter Jasmine and your son Marcus have been planning something. For the last 6 months, they have been very busy. There are some things in here, things that I want you to have, things from our childhood, things that the Mississippi State files finally turned over when Marcus's investigator pushed them hard enough." Henry opened the bag. He pulled out something. A photograph, faded, old. He held it out to Curtis. Curtis took it. He looked at it. The photograph showed a woman, a young black woman, maybe 25 years old. She was holding 2 little boys. One on each hip. The boys were toddlers. They were laughing. "Henry," Curtis whispered, is this our mother?" Henry nodded. "That is our mother. That is Mama. The state had this photograph in the files. Marcus's investigator finally got it released to us. That is you on her left, Curtis. You were 3 years old. That is me on her right. I was 1. That picture was taken just a year before Mama died." Curtis was holding the photograph with both hands, like it was made of glass. He was looking at the face of the mother he had not seen in 55 years, the mother whose face he had spent his whole life trying to remember, the mother who had loved him and his brother enough to give them family names. "She is beautiful," Curtis whispered. "Henry, she is beautiful. She loved us," Henry said. "I have been told a few things by people who knew her. She struggled, she had problems, but she loved us. She loved us so much." Curtis pressed the photograph to his chest. He closed his eyes. The audience clapped softly. The kind of soft, reverent clap that you give when something sacred is happening. A producer stepped forward. Her name was Karen. She had been working on this reunion for 6 months. She walked toward the audience and the cameras with a microphone. She was crying too. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen said, "I want to tell you how this happened because this took a lot of work." She took a breath. The audience was listening. 3 years ago, Karen said, Curtis's son Marcus started looking for his uncle quietly without telling his father. He used his skills as a tech worker to dig into databases that most people cannot access. He hired investigators. He worked tirelessly. 6 months ago, he got a hit, a DNA match to a man named Henry Banks in Tennessee, she continued. But it was not enough to just find Henry. Marcus and Henry's daughter, Jasmine, started working together. They wanted to give their fathers something more than just a phone call. They wanted to give them everything they could. So they spent the last 6 months pushing Mississippi to release the original adoption files, to release the original photograph of their mother, to release the original birth certificates with their family names on them. They got Curtis a copy of his original birth certificate. They got Henry one too. Both of these men had been carrying around adoption certificates that had given them their adoptive names. They had never seen their original names in their own handwriting. Marcus stepped forward. He had a small folder in his hand. He handed it to his father. Curtis opened it. Inside were 2 pieces of paper, faded, old, Curtis's original birth certificate, with his birth name, Curtis Henry Walker, Henry's original birth certificate too, Henry James Walker. Both birth certificates listed their mother's name, Letitia Mee Walker, and both of them listed the same father, a man named Curtis Walker Sr. The grandfather neither of them had ever known about. Curtis was holding the papers. He was crying. He looked at his brother. "Henry, we have a name, we have a real name, we are Walkers, both of us. We were always Walkers, they just changed our names when we were adopted." Henry nodded, he was crying too. "We are Walker brothers, we always were." Steve Harvey halted the rest of the taping for the day. He told both families they would all be flown back to tape another episode. The Bradford family from Texas, the team that had been playing against the Walkers, had been crying along with everybody else. The grandmother of the Bradford family walked over to Curtis and Henry. She told them that her own brother had been put into foster care during the Great Depression, and she had never seen him again. He had passed away before she had been able to find him. She told the 2 of them how lucky they were. She told them not to waste a single day. The episode aired 14 days later. The network ran it as a special 2-hour broadcast. Within 24 hours of airing, the clip of Curtis and Henry running toward each other on the stage had been viewed more than 140 million times. It became one of the most watched Family Feud clips on YouTube that year. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Morning shows wanted to interview the brothers. Magazines wanted to feature them. The 2 of them did some interviews together. They sat side by side. They held hands while they talked. They were rarely seen apart in the months after the episode aired, but the impact extended far beyond the 2 families. A movement started across the country. People began sharing their own stories of separated siblings from the foster care system. Adults who had been separated from brothers and sisters as children. Adults who had spent their lives wondering about the family they had lost. The hashtag, Found Each Other, trended for nearly 6 weeks. State legislatures in 3 different states announced they were going to look into reforming the laws around sealed adoption records and foster care separations. State of Mississippi specifically committed to reviewing how their system had separated siblings throughout the 1960s and 1970s. The state government issued a formal apology to Curtis and Henry several months later, acknowledging that the system had failed them and many other children like them. Steve Harvey used the attention to do something significant. Within 2 months of the episode airing, he announced a new foundation called the Curtis and Henry Walker Brothers Reunion Fund. The fund supported adults who had been separated from siblings as children through the foster care or adoption systems. The fund provided free DNA testing, free private investigation services, free emotional counseling, and connections to legal aid for people trying to access sealed records. Within its first year, the fund had helped reunite over 800 separated siblings across the country. Some of those reunions ended joyfully. Some ended with the discovery that a sibling had already passed away. But all of them got an answer. All of them got peace. Curtis and Henry, after the show, did not waste a single day. Henry flew home to Tennessee. Curtis flew to visit him within 2 weeks. They spent 4 full days together. They walked around Henry's neighborhood. They met all of Henry's friends. They sat at Henry's kitchen table and ate breakfast together. They talked about everything, about their childhoods and their adoptive families, about the parents who had raised them, about the wives they had married, about the children they had raised, about every single thing they had missed in each other's lives. They visited Mississippi together. They went to the small town where they had been born. They stood at the address where their biological mother Letitia had lived. The house had been torn down decades ago. There was a small grocery store there now. They stood in the parking lot for a long time. They prayed together. They thanked their mother for the sacrifices she had made trying to be their mother in the short time she had with them. They forgave her for the choices she had made that had led to her death. They told her they had found each other. They told her she could rest. They visited the cemetery where their mother was buried. The state had located her grave for them. They had bought flowers. They put them on her grave. They stayed there for almost an hour. They had grown up not knowing where their mother was buried. They had grown up not even knowing her name. Now they knew. Now they would visit. They promised her they would visit every year, and they did. Curtis and Henry talked on the phone every single day for the rest of their lives. They visited each other every 2 months. They alternated between Georgia and Tennessee. Their two families merged. Curtis's 3 kids and Henry's 2 kids became close cousins. The grandkids on both sides became inseparable. Doreen and Vivian, the 2 wives, became close friends. They went on vacations together. They cooked Thanksgiving dinners together. The Walker family became one large, beautiful, fully merged unit. Doreen, Curtis's wife, said many times that she had never seen her husband as happy as he was after the reunion. She said the quiet ache he had carried for 58 years had finally been lifted. She said he was a different man. He laughed more. He smiled more. He talked more. He was finally whole. Curtis and Henry had 11 full years together. 11 years of brotherhood. 11 years of catching up on the 54 years they had lost. 11 years of phone calls and visits and shared holidays and family vacations. 11 years of being the brothers they had been born to be. When Henry passed away from a heart attack at the age of 67, Curtis was at his bedside. Curtis had driven to Tennessee the moment Henry had been hospitalized. He had been with his brother for the last 3 days of his life, holding his hand, singing him the church hymns their mother had sung to them when they had been babies. Henry's last words had been to Curtis. He had squeezed Curtis's hand. He had said, "Big brother, thank you for finding me." Then he had closed his eyes, and he had been gone. Curtis gave the eulogy at Henry's funeral. He stood at the front of a small church in Tennessee. He talked about a little brother who had held his hand on the night they had been separated. About the little brother who had become a high school football coach in Tennessee while Curtis had become a postman in Georgia. About the brother he had spent 54 years searching for. About the brother he had finally found through a DNA test and the persistence of his children. He ended his eulogy with these words. He said, "I had 11 years with my brother. I would have given anything to have 65, but I had 11, and those 11 years were the greatest gift of my whole life. Henry. I love you. I will see you again. Save a seat for me. I will be there." Curtis lived for another 9 years after Henry's death. He stayed close to Henry's wife, Vivian. He stayed close to Henry's daughter, Jasmine. The 2 families stayed merged. Curtis went to Tennessee at least 4 times a year for the rest of his life. He visited Henry's grave every visit. He sat there. He talked to his brother. He told him about the kids and grandkids. He told him about everything that had happened since they had last spoken. He kept the conversation going, the way you keep a conversation going with somebody you have loved for your whole life. Steve Harvey kept a photograph in his office from that day on the show. A picture of Curtis and Henry hugging in the middle of the stage, the blue blanket pieces in their hands, the picture of their mother on the floor between them. Steve has said many times that it was one of the most powerful moments of his career. Says he keeps the photograph as a reminder that brothers can find each other, that sealed records can be opened, that the worst things that have been done to children can sometimes, with enough love, be undone. Henry's daughter Jasmine, when people would ask her about the story, always says the same thing. She says, "My father grew up missing somebody he could not name. So did my uncle Curtis. The system that separated them had failed, but the love between them never failed. It just waited. For 54 years, it just waited. And then it found a way back. That is what love does. Love always finds a way back. Always." That is the legacy. That is the story. 2 little black boys in Mississippi in 1969, separated by a foster care system that did not have room for both of them at the same family. 2 children adopted by good families who loved them. 2 grown men who carried the same lifelong ache of missing somebody they could not name. A son named Marcus who refused to give up. A DNA database that finally gave them an answer. And a stage in Los Angeles where 2 strangers ran toward each other and finally became what they had always been. Brothers. If this story moved you the way it moved me, please do me a favor right now. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already. And share this video with somebody who needs to hear this message. And if you know somebody who has been separated from family. Or if you yourself have been carrying around the feeling that there is somebody out there in the world that you should know but have never known. Take a DNA test. Search the databases. Hire an investigator. Make the calls, because somewhere out there tonight there might be a brother, a sister, a parent, a child waiting for you, hoping, praying, holding their breath. The way Henry waited for Curtis for 54 years. The way Curtis waited for Henry. Sometimes love does find its way back. You just have to be brave enough to keep looking. Thank you for watching. And remember, blood is sacred, love is patient, and no separation, no matter how long, is ever truly final. Never.